Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today's panel is going to focus on regulation of digital infrastructure. And we consider digital infrastructure in a broad sense, so also including cloud infrastructure, cloud computing. And when we look at digital regulation, any regulation, by the way, we see, of course, that policymakers try to protect certain goals. It can be in the area of digital, it's often data protection, cybersecurity, resilience, can be competitiveness, competition, many goals that need to be protected. And we have seen that the Commission, European Commission, has been very active in this area over the last mandate. We had the GDPR and the NIS directive were already existing, but we had a lot added to that in the last mandate, NIS2, CRA, other regulations. We almost had an EU CS. We had the Data Act, the DGA, and so forth, and many other policy initiatives in the area of digital infrastructure. And combining and how to say, reconciling the different goals in regulation is tough. It requires balancing, and that is one of the topics we're going to speak about today, how that can be done. And another element, I would say it's a little bit the new kid on the block, is tech sovereignty. That was among the many policy goals that I mentioned. I didn't mention tech sovereignty, whereas currently we hear a lot about tech sovereignty. What is it actually? What are the motives behind tech sovereignty? Is that data protection? Is that cybersecurity? Is that resilience? Is that competition, or even something else? And so this is going to be the topic of today's panel, and I have an excellent set of speakers with me, and I'm going to present them in a bit. Myself, I work for Microsoft. My name is Laureline Hout. I've been with Microsoft for 7 years and work on EU digital policy. And Microsoft, we want to have a discussion about this topic, and which is why I'm so glad that the other speakers are with me. Obviously, as we are a digital player, and digital regulation, EU digital regulation is, of course, impacting us. We understand that. We subscribe to the policy goals I mentioned, data protection, resilience, cybersecurity, of course. Of course, maybe we don't like any and each rule, but we understand them and we apply them and we respect them. And on the tech sovereignty side, of course, we are a US player and we will remain that. But we also have a very large presence in Europe, a very long-standing presence in Europe. By the way, it's anchored in the ground because those data centers, you don't move them immediately. And we think that we can be also a driver towards competitiveness and so forth. Of course, we understand that in the current geopolitical climate, there may be questions about tech sovereignty, which is why recently also we have adopted some commitments towards our customers that we hope will enhance the trust. So this was a short introduction. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my first panelist, and that is Alexandre Ferreira Gomes. As you can hear from the name, he's Portuguese, but he works for the Klingendahl Institute as a research fellow, and he works in the area of tech and digital, so really at the intersection of geopolitics and technology. And it suits him very well because he has a master both in computer engineering from Technical University of Lisbon and also in international politics from University of Amsterdam. And voila, and so he has done research in this area. Alexandre, the Klingendahl has come out with a study, I think a year ago. You don't need to speak about it, but I suspect that you may want to touch upon it. Give us a bit your views on the area of digital regulation, and maybe you can also spend some thoughts on what you have been researching on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. I think the topic is very much important these days. And I will touch upon, indeed, the research that I've been doing, which focuses on, indeed, the intersection between geopolitics and technology. And right in the middle, I would say, you find cloud services. And about 1 year ago, indeed, at Klingendal, we published a policy brief on cloud sovereignty. And back then, our argument was, well, you know, cloud has great advantages. It speeds up innovation and makes it easier for IT teams to develop their products and makes everyone happy. But what we noticed was then, and that's very well known by now, the cloud services market in Europe is dominated by the big three American players, and those are obviously Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. And back then, when we published this, just saying, hey, maybe we should be a little bit more careful with the kind of data that we are uploading and the kind of services we are using. Our policy brief was fairly poorly received in some ministries as having a very anti-American story. A few months later, President Donald Trump is elected in the United States, and by the end of the year, the cloud migration that was happening relatively silent in Dutch ministries to American cloud providers was put to a halt. It was a remarkably fast change in how, in this case, the Dutch government started thinking about dependencies that were deemed okay in the past, because the technology is great and there's no way to argue against that, but also those dependencies started being regarded as vulnerabilities. And in fact, last March there was a debate in the Dutch parliament where there was a remarkable consensus from left to right to consider alternatives in Europe and basically stop to think whether it would be sensitive to move all this data, all these services to non-European clouds. The topic is obviously Trump, and there's no way to run away from that. But also the fact that the United States has extraterritorial or laws with extraterritorial effect, which could in fact enable the American government to request data from these service providers. And very recently, we actually had an example of that happening in practice, not via an executive order, but via sanctions. And that was the ICC case. If you did not follow it, what happened was that the chief prosecutor of the the ICC was sanctioned by the Trump administration, and in practice, today the ICC is not functioning because of the fact that Microsoft had to comply with the sanction, and the email account of this chief prosecutor was blocked, and at this moment in time, the ICC is effectively paralyzed. The issue is, obviously, what's the alternative? What are the European alternatives to try to counteract the quite high power that American providers have in Europe? And there's obviously not alternatives in Europe that can compete with American counterparts, but also if you are a government or if you are a municipality, probably you don't need the latest AI model, and you probably need mostly a few databases and services that can provide the basic functioning services that you need to provide to your citizens. So the argument that we make in this paper is indeed, we don't argue for, you know, the private sector in Europe should stop working with American CSPs. That's not the case. But critical sectors and governments should have a bigger role in stimulating the European cloud service markets. And the subtitle of our report is it too late to act? And if we learn anything with what has happened over the past few months is that the cost of not acting and the cost of doing nothing regarding the current vulnerabilities that we have, to me, seem way higher than the cost of trying to do something about it.
Thank you, Alexandre. That brings me almost needlessly to the next speaker, and that is Andres. Andres Raieste, he's Estonian. Maybe you had heard that, which is, by the way, the most digitalized country in the world or in Europe? Anyhow.
Same.
Anyhow.
It's in the top.
Andres is Vice President Public Sector for Nortal, and Nortal is a global government and tech consultant. So you try to help in your role governments and administrations to digitalize and give them advice on how they can do that. By background, you're a computer engineer as well, I think, and
20 years ago.
And so I have heard that in your free time, you also spend time at drafting white papers on policy topics, which is very welcome. I noted that you wrote one on government resilience in the digital age. So would be great going following Alexandre's comments on public sector. It would be great to hear from you how you see digital tech regulation interplaying with the public sector.
Thank you. Maybe starting a little bit from the background, that I'm not sure that how well is the digital government system that is in Estonia known here. But what does digital government for us mean? In Estonia, everything is digital. 100% of the state services are digital. We have entire generation of people who have never visited a government building in their life. So it's a completely different type of mentality for the entire society. But there's like two things always what I discuss about it. First of all, why that came to be, and second part, what is the impact on society? So why that came to be was actually two reasons. The first reason was that there wasn't money to do anything else. So what does it mean? So the often a kind of a joke what I tell, but it's true actually, is that in the mid-90s, there was a small town in Estonia, and the tax office didn't have money to pay civil servants to collect the tax returns and so forth. And there was one elderly civil servant in the small city collecting the tax returns all by herself. And she was supposed to take the tax returns, enter them to the computer, to the database, and the poor lady wanted to go home. And then she just turned the keyboard and monitor around and told the people, just enter it yourself. And that became the first e-service in Estonia. And turned out that, then also, the access rights, everything else became later, but we very quickly figured out that this is by far the most efficient way how to do things. So for us, that was economic security, and also for the government to actually provide services to its citizen. Now, very quickly, some smart people figured out that this type of providing services that creates a lot of public approval for the government, because people are able to get things done much quicker and so forth, so that started to create trust. And that goes back to actually like something around 50 years ago. One economic scientist figured out that actually trust and efficiency are really the same thing. One person got the Nobel Prize for figuring that mechanism out. And we figured out that anything that creates efficiency also creates trust, and the other way around. So that became like a default way for the government to provide services, because that's by far the most efficient for the citizen, and for the government, and in return, because of that efficiency, that creates trust. Now there is a second side to that. So 10 years later, 2007, world's first massive cyber attack from Russia, which later on NATO's position is that the magnitude of attack that we sustained in 2007 today would invoke Article 5. So overnight, everything happened, changed for us. So cables were cut with chainsaws to stop the attack back then. And that's almost 20 years ago now. And for the past 20 years, we have, because the government is already digital, everything is digital in Estonia. There are very few things that aren't digital. There are no documents, it's data. So for us, this is now an existential threat. So any type of vulnerability for us will not simply, it will stop how our society works, potentially. So for us, data security, cyber resilience, and so forth, this is now an existential question, much more than anywhere else in the world. So that changes quite a bit how do we think about the policies and how also the citizen view the digital government and also the regulations, so forth. So if, for example, there's a different policy service in Estonia and so forth, so quite a lot of discussions that we see in Europe, sometimes we think about it that these are nice discussions, but what threat are you considering? So if you're facing an existential threat, then that sometimes changes your priorities. So from the resilience point of view, for example, as well, we think of digitalization as, for example, as a means to assure the continuity of the state and our democracy, because digital elections, like we have them, 51% of the population last year voted online. We consider them much more secure than any other way of voting, mathematically proven. So we see this as a means to assuring our continuity of the state. So kind of the fundamental philosophy around this is very different. And these sort of things that for example, that whose cloud and so forth. Of course, these are tech sovereignty has a huge part of it, but we also look at this as a geopolitical point of view that we always need allies. So, 20 years ago, we had to rely on the European partners, the US partners, and today as well, we're part of NATO, we're part of Europe, so also the alliances need to be, similar ones as well. Very, very quickly, resonating thoughts, sorry.
No, great. So I hear, different sounds. Digitalization as an efficiency, as an asset, as a protection, but also as at the same time as a point that needs to be protected. We go to Chiara. Chiara is EU Policy Associate at Access Now since, I think, 2022, and she focuses very much on data protection. She has a master's in international law from Amsterdam University and a bachelor from European law in Maastricht. And voila, she's been focusing on human rights and tech.
Thank you so much also for inviting me to be here. I'm very glad to contribute to the discussion from the perspective, especially of civil society. And this is the reason why I think I'm going to focus more on the idea of digital infrastructure for whom, for people. That would be our answer. And for this reason, I want to underline that when we were talking about trust, security, and resilient digital infrastructure, we're not just referring to technical systems, but we are actually talking about people's data and therefore about their rights, their dignity, and their safety in a digital world. For this reason, we believe that to have a trustworthy digital infrastructure, these should be embedded in the foundation of fundamental rights, and specifically the right to data protection. And so I will try to illustrate a bit how the right to data protection, if embedded at the basis of any conversation of the digital infrastructure, can actually help create a system that is trusted, secure, and resilient. And then after, I can also maybe make a little comment about the tension that sometimes are questioned. So first of all, trust. We know that for a trusted system to be one that works, data for people should not be misused and should not be exploited. And principles like transparency, accountability, and for example, purpose limitation are essential to make sure that these are actually, trust is actually a reality for people. And linking it back to the fact that data travels, and so therefore rights should travel with them. I think that the system like the adequacy mechanism created by the European Union is actually a great system on which we should base all our conversation on cross-border data flows. And the value of this agreement is actually great. However, there might be situations where other interests might push the conversation of adequacy, and we should really refrain from having conversation more on economy or political conversation when we're talking about adequacy, because they're based on rights, but I will touch on this a bit later. On security, I actually also, linking back to what Andres said, wanted to give also a new perspective, because we believe that actually cybersecurity and data protection go hand in hand. So security means also protecting data from surveillance, breaches, and misuse. And obviously tools like encryption and things like this are critical actually. But also very important are the question who is controlling the data, where it is stored, so data protection becomes very handy and is essential in that situation. But maybe I can focus on the principle of data minimization actually as not only a principle of data protection, but as a security strategy. Indeed, the less data one collects, the less risk is presented, and also we expose less people to harm. So ideally, this, we believe, should be embedded in the idea of a digital infrastructure that should be focused more on a digital detox rather than a more data. And I know many don't agree with us, but we believe that the principle of data minimization is actually great. And then to continue on the point of resilience, how to make to use data protection as a measure for resilience, let's say. We believe that resilient actually means protecting rights, even and especially in times of conflicts, and especially in times where they are under pressure. So in the moment where rights are put under pressure, the red line should be fundamental rights. For this reason, going back to the point of adequacy decision, we believe that there should be a consistency of in between the decision, and there should always be full compliance with this standard of essentially equivalent, and it should be very clear, because if this standard would be very clear, it would be also very easy for companies to understand what is right and what is wrong, and where is the red line of fundamental rights. And I wanted to bring up an example of the recently renewed adequacy decision with Israel between the EU. This is an example for us, from our point of view, of a situation that illustrates how, when under pressure, sometimes standards seems to be lowered. And we wrote a letter together with EDRI, another very big digital rights organization, where we raised concern because we couldn't understand, we could not answer the question, how is this deal actually meeting the essential equivalent standard? Because the rule of law in Israel is increasingly deteriorating. The Israeli data protection framework is also posing as a lot of gaps in contradiction to our system, and they also have a different understanding now of national security frameworks, principle like necessity or proportionality, and they have ongoing surveillance operation that they don't match what is our European standards. And on top, there are remaining questions like how does this match, like how did the EU assess, for example, a principle like a criteria, of international human rights standards, given what is actually going on now that has been called by the ICJ a plausible genocide. So all in all, also the APB actually supported our our claims, raising that we need to have a very clear understanding of what is the standard and it should be very well interpreted. And to go back to the resilience, we need to make sure that to be resilient, there is always, the red line of fundamental rights is always respected, especially in turbulent times and not less in turbulent times. And this also means sometimes repealing deals. And to conclude, because maybe my time is up, I'm scared, I wanted to comment on the idea of the tensions between, for example, innovation, data protection, competition, and all these goals that the EU indeed is trying to put together. For us, we rejected the idea, for example, that data protection stands in the way of all these goals. We actually think that they go all hand in hand and they can help each other. So starting from cybersecurity, data minimization is actually a strong and helpful friend that goes with it. And also we believe that innovation actually can grow with guardrails, and that's the only innovation that we should be looking at because it's an innovation focused with in mind people. If not, we lead to innovation that leads to exploitation, public distrust, and we lose the very goal of trust, security, and resilience. So yeah, this all in all was my comment on focus on data protection. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chiara, for giving that perspective. I have a question, but I would like to first give the floor to Valerie. Valerie Huss. She's head of European affairs at Commerzbank, and she's done that for over a year. And before that, she was for a very long time at Deutsche Bank in the public policy team, where she worked on different topics, sustainability, anti-money laundering, but also in the last 5 years, she was head of the digital policy and anti-money laundering policy. And so in that role, she sort of set the policy strategy for Deutsche Bank on cloud, AI, data, and so forth, cyber. So Valerie, you work for banks, commercial companies. How do you look at those topics? You have to deal with a lot of digital regulations. You have to deal with cloud providers as well. So how do you look at that? And if you can, I don't know whether you're planning it, but we haven't spoken about data localization. So if in case you weave that in, that would be great. And otherwise, we keep it for the questions.
Okay, good. Great. I will try to take that on. I took note of the task. Maybe taking a step back, what makes a successful bank? And a lot of people will say it's money. It's, cost-income ratio, all these numbers, that's what investors are looking at. But it also boils down to data and trust. Because ultimately, what we do and what we deal with on a very daily basis, front to end, is customer data, and it's sensitive customer data. So whether you look at information that we use as part of the services that we offer and that we provide, payment flows and those things, or whether you look at the things that we need to do in the back end in order to assess if and how and who to work with. Let's take creditworthiness assessments, for example, risk assessments in general. Or whether you look at information that we have to collect because we're being asked to by our supervisors and by regulation. Know your customer information, etc. So data is really at the core of what we do. And at the same time, we are also in an environment where banks change, they merge, they grow, systems merge, sometimes they don't. Some of them are newer, some of them are old. So in order to be able to provide those services, in order to be able to keep the data for our customers safe, and also to make sure that numbers like our cost-income ratio look good, we need to modernize our infrastructure. We need to make sure that it is up to standard, that it's secure, and that it also complies with the expectations that our regulators have. And moving to the cloud is a big tool that we are using. We do this in a context where we are always essentially looking at different policy goals directed at us from different perspectives. So we have Banking Secrecy Acts, very clearly focused on making sure that the customer's information is protected. At the same time, we're also required to make sure that no money is being laundered, that we report information. We are looking at situations where there is an expectation for us, as I just mentioned, to make sure that our legacy systems are being updated or exchanged and that complexity is reduced. And at the same time, you also don't want to concentrate too much because that creates a concentration risk. So what I'm trying to say is that the different policy goals always have trade-offs to a certain extent. And so what we do very much is we try and find the trade-off in a way that works for us and that fulfills most of these policy goals to the best extent possible. And when we look at who to partner with, clearly, as usual, there is a lot of regulation around it. And that means we have a lot of aspects that we look at as part of our due diligence. We need to make sure that the service is actually fulfilling the business needs on the one hand, in terms of scalability, we're a globally active bank, in terms of speed, in terms of innovation, because our customers really do expect state-of-the-art services. And at the same time, we look at security, we look at governance, we look at their security measures. There's a lot of people involved. We have a lot of very detailed discussions with the providers, which I'm sure your colleagues will be able to confirm. And then once we have made the decision through the whole life cycle, we also monitor and manage the provider relationship with audits, with testings. DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, for those that are not familiar, is even expecting us to include our service providers into threat-led pen testing under certain conditions. So security is not just something that we take for granted from our providers. It's also something that we check and that we work on from our side as well. And data localization, I promised I would look at it, or the control over where data sits is rather what I would like to look at. It's important. And we ourselves also make clear distinctions about which data, which application sits where. And that is a question of with which provider, that's a question of is it in the cloud at all or not? But those are risk-based decisions that we undertake, and maybe that's the third thing that I was supposed to mention, like outside money that's important for a bank. We're risk managers. That's all we do, essentially, every single day.
Thank you, Valerie. We go to the last panelist. That's Michael Aandenhof. Michael is Digital Affairs and Cyber Coordinator at the Belgian PermRep, so the mission to the EU, right? He's been a Belgian diplomat for a long time, 19 years. He's been deputy head of the mission in Oslo, and he's also been in Iceland and Israel And right now in Brussels, he's dealing with all files digitals and has an extremely strong interest in cyber, I can say. He was also active on those files during the Belgian presidency in the first half of 2024.
Thanks very much. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me on this panel. I feel I'm going to have some water first. I feel like I represent the government here. So when I see the setup here, so it's a small burden I have to share. And especially as we've been speaking a lot about trust here today already in the room, there is this essential trust that should exist between citizens and their governments. And I'm a political scientist by training, so allow me to go a little bit on that side track as well. Because what we hear today is that there is less and less trust by citizens in their governments. It's something we face, especially in Belgium. We know that already for a long time, but that has other reasons. But you see it's something happening around the world. And this is linked to the social contract that you have as a citizen with your government and certain obligations that you have as a government to deliver to your citizens. This is about security. This is about defending your rights. This is about making sure that there is a system for the economic market, so for your business. It's about democratic accountability. So there's a few elements that a government needs to reassure. And the problem with technology is that this disrupts everything. On all these different levels, it becomes very hard for a government to take up its responsibility and its role, especially as we are in a cross-border and worldwide situation. So when I got the invitation for the panel, I was struck actually by the title of this. The reconciliation between data protection, resilience, and cybersecurity. I don't get actually why we have to reconcile this. It's quite obvious in the end, if you look at this, that these are quite similar in where we're going. So it's quite interesting actually that, that we are in this kind of debate. And therefore, allow me to just take a step back and to really see what we are talking about when we talk about strategic autonomy. I'm a diplomat, you have to forgive me, I love this kind of concepts and debates. But strategic autonomy in the end is about two things. It's about the fact that you're able to act independently, so that's one. And secondly, is that you do not excessively rely on an external actor. And I think those two criteria should be the touchstones of whatever we are discussing when we're discussing strategic autonomy. Technological sovereignty or digital sovereignty, those are actually translations of the concept of strategic autonomy in the domains that we are discussing. Technological sovereignty is about critical technology and data. Digital sovereignty, then we talk about data, platforms, and infrastructure. So if you see it from that perspective, I think it becomes more realistic, perhaps to see where you should and you shouldn't be discussing sovereignty for Europe. Because that's a second element, apart from a second message I had, apart from stepping back to what strategic autonomy actually is. We should start from a realistic perspective and not from aspirations. I think the debate about the lack, for example, on cloud solutions that are European, we've had that before, we know where we stand, but we should have the debate about actually what we need and what we do not need. So there's a part of cloud where definitely for security reasons, we need European infrastructure because again, we need this trust. We need to reassure and be able to assure the security of certain types of data. So I think this realistic perspective is what you need. You can't be sovereign on everything. That's, I think, quite clear. And as a third element, it's good, again, to see what a government can do and what it cannot do. I think normally a state has, I would say, 4 levers for its action. It's violence, it's the monopoly of violence, but I don't think, for example, the EU has this. It should not, and it has not, at least for now. But then there are 3 other elements that they do have. One is regulation, a second is budget, and a third one is diplomacy. So if you look at regulation, we have loads of regulation. I'm part of this machinery that creates that kind of legislation. I must say it's really burdensome as well for those who are negotiating it. But of course, even much more for those who have to implement it or to accept it. And The current debate that we're having about simplification is a very valid one and an important one, but we should not overstep it and go fully into deregulation. I don't think we're going to be able to establish trust by simply deregulating everything. This is not the way to ensure security or rights protection or even the organization of the markets. So it's really finding the right balance that we have to do. In terms of budget, it's about using it wisely, spending it wisely. We know we don't have a lot of money left, I would say, for the moment at the government level. So it's really about creating the right circumstances to attract capital back to Europe, to make sure as well that the money that we do have, that we invest it wisely, and that we create also conditions in which we can find money, loan money to use it and to stimulate the competition of our companies. And then thirdly, and again, I'm a diplomat, so I would like to stress the importance of diplomacy. I mean, more and more we are in this cross-border reality worldwide, where the international management of, for example, data streams is essential. We have to have partnership as a European Union. We cannot just be going around and thinking that the Brussels effect, us, or the idea that sometimes exists, that Europe is there waving with its finger and telling the rest of the world how things should be done, that this will work. No, we have to really go and on the ground and establish those partnerships. I think that what you see today is a European Commission, for example, who is much more active than ever before in establishing this kind of partnerships around the world and trying to make sure that we have good arrangements for data adequacy, for example, or others. So, but that we should even do a lot more. So a few ideas to start with.
Thank you. Before we go to the next round, is there anyone who has questions or reactions on other points? I do maybe have some. Anyone else from you? We can also open the floor for questions. I would like to maybe start with one question to Alexandre. And I mean, it's a bit two questions. So if I hear your view on sovereignty, you say public administrations have to look carefully when they go into the cloud. Less so for the private sector, but okay. Public administrations, mainly because of the risk for data access from US government?
Yes,
Yes.
not only. But
Not only, but mainly. I would like to ask two questions in that regard. First of all, if you have, imagine that you would have European companies that provide you the alternative, but that when those companies get big and when they start working in the US, they will equally be subject to US laws, just in the same way as we are subject to EU laws right now. So how do you see that aspect, that element? And then secondly, what do you think would be then, how would you see, do you think the administration, I mean, I'm going to put it bluntly and I don't want to sound aggressive or something, but like, do you think should there be more paper or do you see other digital alternatives for administrations?
paper as in?
Paper as in, we go back to the non-Estonian world.
No, yeah. Well, regarding the first point, the reality that we have today, whether you like it or not, is that American companies operating in Europe, even with local entities, are still subject to extraterritorial or laws with extraterritorial effect from the US. And the ICC case just shows that. There's no way Microsoft can just not comply with what Donald Trump decided, which was a political decision on a conflict elsewhere. It's different, I know, and that's also good to mention, obviously, that when data has been requested to companies like Microsoft and others, the tendency is to go to courts. And that's also what the recent digital commitments from Microsoft states, is that the commitment to go to court when the American government requests data will be even placed in new contracts. That's very welcome. The scenario that you propose where European companies grow, the advantage of having European companies in this field is that they would be only subject to our own laws. And the scenario that you pose where our European companies grow so much, that would be a good scenario, but they also open operations in the US. That's a legal theme that I'm not sure would be in practice the case, because the European data would still be based in Europe, based on all the regulations that we have, and I'm not convinced that opening an office or an operation or a data center in the US would oblige those companies to send European data based in Europe back to the US. But that becomes legal and difficult to discuss. But it's certainly less likely, or a better scenario than what we have today. Regarding the second point, no, we don't argue that we should go back to paper, but what we see in many governments, with the notable exception of Estonia certainly, is that there's still a lot of in-house servers going on, right? So governments are still learning and trying to understand what's the best way to migrate. And the argument that we have is, before you actually do it, make sure that what you are putting out there is not essential to your sovereignty or to your citizen security and so on. That's all. Be careful. Have a second look. To give an example, last year, 2 years ago, or even rather 2022, the Dutch government published a cloud policy where a few ministries, including the Ministry of Defense and Internal Affairs, are exceptions, as in they cannot migrate to cloud services by definition. There's a new cloud policy where I would expect that that list is extended to a certain extent. Ministries like Ministry of Health, for instance, and a few others. So let's look at what are the critical sectors that we have where we need to be extra careful. That's all.
Thank you. I see Andres looking at this.
Yeah, I would love to add a additional angle here, also from the geopolitical point of view, that I mean, obviously data sovereignty is important for everybody, but there is a, let's say, coming back to the geopolitical threat topic a little bit, back to the, when I talked about the Russian cyber attack in 2007, there was one policy that we invoked in Estonia. Back then, we called it Plan B. Plan B was the plan that what if we lose the capital? What happens then? And that's a very difficult topic, how to even handle that in politics. So let's say really, what does the contingencies truly mean? And history helps us a little bit. So when in only a couple of 100 years ago, when an occupying force took a city, what did they do first? They went for the church, because in the church are the books where everybody lives, registries, the government registries. This is the goal. If you want to occupy something, you go for the government registries. Why? If you have a single copy of those, then you can hide, you can make people disappear, you can legalize your occupation, you can take the companies, change the owners, you can do whatever you want if there is one single copy of it. So the plan B was that we cannot have paper registries. They must be digital. And they cannot only be contained within Estonian borders. Back then it was a state secret that there were several countries. Now it's a public information that we have we have what we call data embassy in Luxembourg, where the most critical information of the Estonian population, businesses, society exists as a digital copy. But then, 25th of February, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine started. So obviously, we asked the question that, Kiev was under almost partially encircled, and there was a question for us, have they managed to get their data out? Turns out they weren't. So several countries came to help, Poland, Estonia, we did, also later on also international companies from the US, including Microsoft. And there is there will be movies about this eventually, but when Kiev was partially encircled, then the people in Kiev were dismantling their data centers. They put them into hundreds of Toyota Corollas and broke out of the partially encircled Kiev and drove their most critical information systems and registries to Estonia, to Poland, and so forth, where eventually they started to operate. Not as a backup, but where they started eventually to operate their systems. And this is when we understood that this is actually how we provide security in the digital age in the future, that we need to be able to operate. If we're under threat, we need to be capable of operating our governments from foreign soil if necessary, from other democratic countries, our allies, and it becomes a new defense doctrine. So this, again, it's changed our understanding for the importance of international relations, diplomacy, alliances, and we need to figure out these other things that we talk about, data sovereignty, all these sort of things. What we're discussing here, we're discussing transatlantic trust, we're discussing trust between institutions, between European nations, and so forth. But these are solvable problems. All of these, they will take decades. But I think that for the, if we look at the European project and the free democratic world as a, hopefully a project that will be, perpetual in nature, then these are those problems that we need to solve. And we, fundamentally speaking, if we, my data is mine, that also means that my data dies with me. So that's again, a different perspective from the security point of view, perhaps. But I very much also agree with the importance of data sovereignty. Simply, it has additional angles, I believe.
Thank you. Valerie, you wanted to jump in as well.
Yes. One aspect that I wanted to bring up is that we also need to be careful to not fall into zeros and ones when it comes to this discussion around data sovereignty, strategic autonomy, however you want to call it, or which part of it you're looking at, right? It's not like EU-based CSPs are all safe. US-based CSPs are all not safe just because of where the headquarters are. There's good ones, there's bad ones on both sides. It's not like you move everything you do and all the data you have into the cloud or not. It's also not like you pick one provider and that provider is going to be infrastructure, platform, and software, and it's just all you have, because that's also not true. So ultimately, with everything we do and with the different policy tools and also with the different governance and controls and risk management measures that we apply, what we do is we try to manage the risk that is there, and we try to find the best solution. Whether that solution is going to be perfect is a whole another discussion, but I really struggle with this discussion always being, or not always, but often being, we need this and everything else, just forget about it. Also, geopolitical situation or political risk in general, again, is not like 100% certainties about what's happening. This is really challenging because what it does is it forces us to really stay on our toes, make sure we monitor, make sure we have risk scenarios in place, we have options in place. It's decision trees. That we have options once a certain situation happens and that we're prepared.
Do you want to jump in on the international, or shall we also? I'm also going to check if there. We will do a last roundup with the panel, but I'm also asking in the room if there are questions. But first, Chiara. Yes.
Just very, very super briefly, I just wanted to say that when you spoke about the idea that data localization doesn't mean that then the data is safe, right? So my only little contribution to this conversation more on tech sovereignty would be that, first of all, we should ensure that there is individual sovereignty, and I think that should be the first basis of the conversation before then having a conversation more broad, because indeed data localization doesn't mean data protection, right? So we should first of all focus on local level, somewhere EU, so then I can speak more about it, but like GDPR and other things, and then continuing this conversation of convergence, global convergence of data protection laws. Yeah.
Well, I think I agree with everybody. I agree with everything that was said already so far, which shows as well that the debate is maturing. I think what happened in the US in January has put us really on our toes constantly now, and I think we're all very aware of risks that actually we were already aware beforehand, but perhaps we did not want to admit. So this is really moving, and this is one of these things that you knock people dead with in negotiations, but I think we're really heading into the good direction with this. I feel that once we have like a good common understanding of what we actually want throughout these different layers, this is really something quite positive for Europe. It's I find it difficult to say, and perhaps would also, if I may, challenge the audience. Like, is there anything you disagree with? Is there anything you would think like, yeah, but perhaps you're just dreaming too much, this is too utopian, this is a reality check perhaps, because it's sometimes you feel like, look, we're all agreeing.
Hello everyone, my name is Matthias Rubnik. I work at Europol's data protection function. First of all, thanks a lot for the very interesting conversation and the different angles. I do not want to play the devil's advocate, but I want to touch upon again on the example of Andre related to the access of Microsoft and ICC. And I would be interested about Andre's point of view, or let's say the Estonian doctrine, because so it touches also upon data sovereignty. So on the one hand, you could say, okay, I'm not using cloud service anymore, but I think that's also not an option. So then you need to have it on-prem, you need to have all the infrastructure to use the systems. On the other hand, or you say you use your own, let's say, for example, open source, whatever, tools, which you again are fully aware and host by yourself. But I think on the long run, it's unrealistic not to use cloud services. So in my personal opinion, the only solution might be a sovereign cloud system in Europe, which is again quite hard. And there are like initiatives like Gaia X or whatever. So I would be very interested on your thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
I can reflect on the Estonian government's policy on data sovereignty, and essentially the pragmatic thinking here is that how to assure that you do not become dependent on a single cloud provider. So there were a lot of different very practical issues with cloud adoption during the past 10 years, where lots of companies, government institutions did not simply realize that often opting for a single cloud meant that you're actually opting for a single platform, and that truly is a problem sometimes. So, the general emerging policy, which in Estonia, very luckily due to some of the decisions, Estonia has a very high level of tech sovereignty because of simply history, but the emerging policy is that there is like a government cloud center that is not providing cloud services by itself, but in reality that assures that there is an equal competition between different cloud providers from all over the world that have to comply with certain regulations and so forth, and to assure that there is always competition. But also, if there is competition, that in reality drives innovation, that decreases the cost, and so forth. So definitely what the Estonian government doesn't, for example, want to end up with is of having one single local cloud provider that is owned by the government. Because in reality, there is, something, there is often a question that, for example, how was Estonia able to innovate? Innovation is always driven by something, mostly by competition. Competition is driven. So we have to also in Europe, we absolutely have to assure the equal competition. The question is simply that, how do in international trade, if there is a certain bias towards the American providers, then that's a very high-level Commission policy, topic, that how to promote European cloud providers as well. So, but from the country's point of view, from the Estonian government point of view, that is mostly the question that, that how to assure that Estonia has different options. But definitely the answer there isn't that we only need one national cloud provider, because that is actually the opposite of so what different countries should. They should have options, not one option, even if that is a sovereign option.
Thank you. One more question there. Two more.
Yeah, maybe a question for Alexandre. I would like to have your opinion on the, it's a kind of isolated initiative in France with SecNum certification. So SecNum, for the audience who doesn't know, is about public services who go cloud. They have to use French certified SecNum type of solutions. And today we only have local players, but they don't scale, they don't have features. And we have also initiatives like Microsoft was working with local service providers to basically offer their services running on a local service provider. And this entity is not subject to non-European laws. So that's the goal. So I don't know about the status of the certification, if Bleu is certified already or soon. So maybe a question for you. But question for Alexandre, what do you think about this alternative? Because we are talking about GAFAMs, we're talking about European service provider solutions, but we also have this in-between kind of option where the best of the technology, the US solutions run and are operated by European entities not subject to US law. So maybe the best of both. And what do you think of the fact that only France is pushing for this? They push for this in EUCS. I don't know about the EUCS status, but it's not going anywhere. They wanted this in EUCS, EUCS I+, but it's not happening. So I don't know if with Trump on board, that might change. Long question.
Regarding the first question, my question back is if it's indeed from a legal point of view assured that data that stays in Europe does stay in Europe and cannot be exceeded by others, or that a sanction coming from the US does not impact the data. That's the question, right? That's the dependency or the vulnerability that we have. And so if the solution operationally works well, it's supported by a partner like Microsoft, which has contributed for European innovation, and if then we have the sovereignty clause or the sovereignty concern assured, I don't see any issue with that. Second question again, sorry? Yeah, UCS.
Let's say the solution is still being operationalized. So, but the goal is yes to be SecNum Cloud. Maybe just one factual element, and now I'm abusing my role. But I wanted to mention is, like if you look at standard law enforcement requests that we get, which is in the last 5 years, US authorities have had no request for European business data at all. Then of course there are intelligence laws that are different, but I wanted to have like, it's a factual element which I think is relevant, but okay.
Thanks. On the UCS, for those, what I already mentioned, right? In terms of if, by the way, I want to connect with what was said something about strategic autonomy and the ability of having a choice. I will probably ask parts of or people from Dutch government to contact you, Andres, because one of the issues when we released this report 1 year ago was that the only partner that the Dutch government was engaged with was Microsoft. Almost 100%. So that was one of the issues, right? Even from a business point of view or business continuity perspective, this makes no sense whatsoever. Regarding the UCS, again, for those elements that we consider key elements to protect our citizens, and this has been already mentioned in the red ones, was the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Internal Affairs, but sectors like health. For those, I think a high plus level on EUCS would be welcome, but I also see resistance from the Dutch government, for instance, on not doing that, and I'm not sure exactly for the reasons for that. I also hear from European cloud providers that the burden, the resources required to comply with certifications would be such that in practice, that would have no effect. So that's also something that we need to understand and hear from the European private sector to see if that would be in practice feasible. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Philipp Reth. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer of Allianz Insurance Company. And my question is, so if these legal concepts like data sovereignty and political borders don't work anymore, how about technical borders, right? And I'm thinking there especially about encryption, right? The model where we're not quite there, but where we could get to, that Microsoft, other cloud providers have our data, it's encrypted, but we as data controllers keep the keys, right? That's not always possible, you know, when you do the whole processing, but also with homomorphic encryption, this should be possible. But question to the panel, is this a dream, or do you see that as a technologically, but also then factually as a solution which you know, could resolve a couple of issues here?
You want to take that question? And then I propose that after answering that question extensively, unless there are burning questions, that we go to a last roundup of the panel.
Thank you. I think your question points to a debate that we're having as well on the sovereignty requirements now at European level, how we are going to translate them into really concrete regulation. We have seen EUCS as a very good example of the certification of cyber certification of cloud services. Just for not everybody is familiar, although you must have really been out of the EU bubble if you're not familiar with this. But there's also, for example, on the cyber reserve that we have now in the Cyber Solidarity Act at the European level, where providers could be requested to have certain sovereignty requirements. We see the single market strategy. We see that coming in a lot of different pieces of legislation. And so far, the 5G cybersecurity toolbox is actually the one where we have it already, and where is the most clear example of sovereignty requirements, but we speak less about this because this was more not really about the transatlantic issue, but about other issues. Now, the fact is, so far at the European level, this has practically always been delegated at a technical level. So at a political level, the debate is often, I wouldn't say avoided, but just put in very broad terms, actually what I've been doing so far as well. It's really the nitty-gritty there, where you put like real concrete boundaries on data localization, on legislative frameworks and everything, that is left to technical negotiators. And I think that that's a problem. I think Europe needs to live up to, or we as legislators, we need to live up to what we want and really want, and also make it very clear. Gaia X was already mentioned here today as well as an example, and I think Gaia X shows very well how things can go wrong. Because if you see this was created in 2019, we still have nothing. The only thing is that perhaps it did was to provoke the debate on European cloud solutions and really make sure that we have this. But the problem with GaiaX, one of the issues was that we didn't have a clear vision or strategy what we actually wanted. It's just nice to speak about autonomy in practice, but then what we actually want is an issue. And now to come to your question on the encryption. Yeah, sorry, I don't take that personally. Encryption is a huge debate for the moment now, and I think it is a specifically one where, again, we need to have this not only at the technical, we will have it at the technical level, but it should be really had at a political level. Because currently this encryption debate, we see it everywhere in the world, and it's often left to law enforcement or to others to have this discussion. But I think that at the political level, the responsibility needs to be taken to really tackle this debate. So I don't have the answer, but it's really, I think, there that the debate should be had.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. I would like a roundup from my panel. What are next steps, solutions, possible things to consider for the EU? Chiara, do you want to start?
For sure, I can start. I'll be super brief, but I think, given also what I said before on data protection, the focus now should be really, because the issue is that, yeah, everyone talks about data protection, but it's not actually fully there. We still have companies that need to fully comply with principle and embed it in their design of their system. So first of all, do not reopen the GDPR. Second, enforce the GDPR. Third, make sure that cross-border data flow are based on adequacy and human rights.
That's a strong message. Anders, 1 minute.
I think a lot of the problems have very simple solutions. And sometimes these solutions are so simple that they can even be counterintuitive. So this entire data privacy topic, for example, and we have solved it in a way simply with radical transparency. So in Estonian government, if anybody in Estonian government looks at my personal data in real time, I can see it. In real time, I can see it. If anybody in Estonian government looks in any government database, my personal data, I can see it. You can solve things with transparency. So the technology, how to put that in place, so that requires certain type of regulations, policies, and so forth. But there is a political choice whether we forbid or we allow for the greater benefit but create transparency. These are fundamental policies that we're discussing. So every problem has multiple different solutions, but let's choose the one that we benefit the most from.
Thank you. Valérie.
Okay, I also have 3 points that I would like to mention. One is enable risk-based decisions based on transparency. Certifications can help, and it's honestly sad that EU CS is not there. I'm not talking about the sovereignty requirements because that's a very different discussion, but the comparability that a certification like EU CS would be able to provide to customers who need to take a decision would be a very helpful step. Second, increase trust. We have a direct oversight regime now for the financial sector for critical third-party service providers. This is still being set up, but nevertheless, it could be an important step as well. Question is, will it provide all the necessary information? To which extent can it be used as an example more broadly? But again, trust and transparency. And then third, make it easier to comply with regulation overall, where providers are subject to different regulation than their customers, or where their different customer groups are subject to different regulations that the providers need to fulfill. That's a challenge. And it's particularly a challenge for smaller providers that want to scale up and that want to be able to service regulated industries. You need to have a lot of time if you want to contract with one of the major regulated institutions, simply because due diligence requirements take up a lot of time.
Thank you. You will almost have to share 1 minute, but maybe we can go 1 minute over.
I'll try 20 seconds, very quickly. The European Commission is already working on this, but public procurement and buy European clauses might be a way to go. The governments are probably the biggest IT spenders in each country, so there's a lot of money that is just not being allocated to European providers that can do more. And the implementation of the Data Act, which will hopefully help avoiding vendor lock-in and increase interoperability. That is also, even from a competition point of view, regardless of where the CSPs are based on, a very important step. And yeah.
Thank you. And Michael?
Very short, and actually aligned with what I just said before, is that I think that this kind of debates and decisions, what you need to bring together is a technical community and a political/diplomatic community. These people need to talk to one another and take this kind of decisions also together. So you cannot have technical decisions taken at political level or vice versa, but it needs to go hand in hand to make sure it's something workable, realistic, but also that it's answers to geopolitical concerns and fundamental rights.
Thank you all. It's a complex debate, and I hope we have helped unraveling it a little bit today. And I want to thank the panelists and the audience for listening to us. Thank you.